You are accused of flying on a broomstick. You know this is absurd. You are absolutely certain of your innocence, but after several weeks of interrogations, you will not only confess to it, but you will also name your accomplices. This is not fiction. This is the standard, documented result of the Inquisition's machine, where over 80% of the roughly 50,000 people executed for witchcraft were women. It wasn't a witch hunt. It was a genuine gender-based purge. How did a system that claimed to seek divine truth create the most effective assembly line for false confessions in history? It wasn't about magic, but psychology. The answer to this question is a 7-step mechanism for hacking the human mind, which we will now deconstruct. This machine operated on an inverted logic. To understand it, we must answer 2 paradoxical questions. First, why did the accused who tried to logically prove their innocence have a lower chance of survival than those who remained silent or immediately repented for an absurdity? And the second, more profound question, how could the Inquisitors, whose official goal was to find divine truth, create the most effective assembly line for false confessions in history? If they were supposed to fight falsehood, not generate it. The point of no return was the year 1487. The answers to these questions are hidden deep within the psychology of the system. We will uncover the first in the 4th section. The second will become clear by the end of this investigation. This is more than just a historical overview. We will conduct a complete deconstruction of the system. You will gain a comprehensive understanding of the 7 key psychological tools from the Inquisition's arsenal, tools that forced people to abandon their own reality. This system worked like a vice. Each psychological tool was another turn of the screw, slowly and relentlessly crushing the victim's consciousness. These manipulative techniques are universal. The ability to recognize them is a tool for self-defense against pressure in the modern world, in the media, in negotiations, in relationships, and we will expose the first and most fundamental of these tools in just a few minutes. Here are the 3 key stages of our analysis. In just 4 minutes, we will expose the foundation of the entire system, the presumption of guilt. You will understand why it was nearly impossible to be saved after the first denunciation. Around the 9-minute mark, you will learn about the art of the loaded question, a linguistic technique where any answer, yes or no, only confirmed the accused's guilt. And at the 18-minute mark, we will reach the climax. You will see how impersonal bureaucracy turned terror into a routine, and why this is the most terrifying and modern element of the entire Inquisition machine. The path is set. Let's begin dismantling the machine of fear with its main component. In the court of the Inquisition, a reasoned defense was the worst possible tactic. How could it be that attempting to prove one's innocence made a person even more guilty in the eyes of the judges? The answer lies in the first tool, the absolute presumption of guilt. A denunciation was not a cause for investigation. It was considered established proof of a divine sign pointing to a sinner. The Inquisitor's task was not to find the guilty party, but merely to obtain a formal confirmation of the truth he already knew. This wasn't the work of rogue fanatics. In 1252, Pope Innocent IV, with his bull Ad Extirpanda, officially authorized interrogation, under duress, turning prejudice into law. One of the tests was the tear test. The inability to cry from terror was considered proof of a pact with the devil. But for this absurd logic to work, the victim's mind had to be prepared. The process of hacking the mind began not with words, but with silence. An absolute, crushing silence. What do a cold stone cell and the human mind have in common? The Inquisition sought to make both completely empty, only to then fill them with its own will. The second tool, complete isolation and an information vacuum. The accused was cut off from the world, no contact with family, no news, not even the cycle of day and night. This created sensory deprivation and a loss of the sense of time. This was not just a prison, but a deliberate erasure of personality. The outside world ceased to exist. Memories felt like a dream. The only reality became the jailer's footsteps and the anticipation of interrogation. And into this vacuum stepped the Inquisitor. He became the victim's entire universe. His words carried absolute weight, and he spoke in a very specific way. How do you ask a question so that any answer is a confession of guilt? The third tool, the technique of trap questions. A classic example. Have you stopped flying to the Sabbath on Saturdays? Answering yes confirms you used to fly. Answering no confirms you continue to fly. There is no logical way out of this trap. This was not a trick, but a science, described in detail by Heinrich Kramer in his Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches. Over 200 years, this book went through 29 editions, second in popularity only to the Bible. Thousands of inquisitors across Europe were trained in this art from a single textbook. The true purpose of these questions was not to obtain information. Their task was to exhaust the accused and make her doubt her own memory. Words broke logic. But to break the will, the Inquisition used something everyone has, their own body. What if the most effective instrument of torture is not the rack, but a glass of water and a piece of bread? The fourth tool, manipulation of sleep and food. Constant sleep interruption, known as torture by waking, and meager rations were used to deliberately exhaust the body. A jailer could wake the victim every 15 minutes for weeks on end. Modern psychology confirms that just 48 hours of sleep deprivation leads to hallucinations, paranoia, and a sharp increase in suggestibility. The Inquisitors of the 15th century discovered this through experience. The visions of demons reported by the accused could have been a direct result of this torture. The Inquisition didn't just torment the body, it systematically shut down critical thinking. The mind became pliable, and once it was broken, it was offered a deal. After weeks of silence, hunger, and verbal traps, the cell door would open, and the Inquisitor would offer the victim hope. And that was the most terrifying part of all. Why would a person who denied their guilt for months, knowing that a confession led to the stake, suddenly break and willingly sign their own death warrant? The answer lies in the fifth tool, the illusion of mercy. After weeks of pressure, the Inquisitor would abruptly change tactics. In a quiet, sympathetic voice, he would speak of saving the soul, offering a simple way out. Confess, and the suffering will end. For an exhausted mind, this was not a choice between life and death, but between endless pain now and its guaranteed cessation. But a confession was never the end. It was the key to the next door of hell. Mercy was a tool that turned the victim into a weapon. This is how one broken person became the cause of death for dozens of others. How could the witch hunts continue for centuries, claiming up to 50,000 lives, 80% of whom were women? The fuel for this fire was the sixth tool, social contagion. After a merciful confession, the victim was required to name those she saw at the Sabbath. Under torture, people named neighbors, relatives, enemies. Each new name was a new case. This wasn't a hunt. It was a viral epidemic, where each infected person was forced to infect several others. 50,000 executed is as if an entire medieval city the size of Florence had been completely emptied. But for this mechanism to work, the whole of society had to be convinced of its righteousness. Inside the cell, a person was broken psychologically, but outside, a grand spectacle had to be staged. Imagine yourself as a town dweller in the 15th century. Every Sunday, You see another witch being burned at the stake in the town square, publicly repenting for her sins. At what point do you start to believe that witches are real? The public nature of the events created the illusion of irrefutable proof. The auto da fe, or act of faith, was not just an execution, but a meticulously staged ritual. Its purpose was to teach a lesson to thousands of spectators, reinforcing their fear and faith in the system. Thus, the system became self-validating. Torture produced confessions. Confessions, displayed publicly, produced mass fear. And fear justified more torture. It was a perfect, closed loop. But, for this assembly line to run for so long, it needed one final element, one related not to cruelty, but to ink and paper. We have dissected 6 cruel tools of this machine. We have seen how the system created guilt, broke the will through isolation and starvation, cynically used hope as a weapon, and triggered a chain reaction of accusations. But all these tools would have been just scattered acts of violence without the 7th, final element, an element that transformed individual cruelty into an impersonal, efficient, and self-replicating mechanism of terror. We have reached the climax of our investigation, the most terrifying and modern tool in the Inquisition's arsenal. What is more frightening than a fanatic who genuinely believes in what he is doing, an official who is indifferent? This is the 7th and final tool, the bureaucratization of terror. In the archives of the Inquisition, the use of the rack could be documented with the same dryness as the expenditure of candles, as a routine clerical operation. This was not a massacre, but an orderly process. The Inquisitor was not a sadist, but a functionary. His task was not to save a soul, but to correctly fill out paperwork in accordance with the manual, the Malleus Maleficarum. Now, the answer to our second question is clear. The Inquisitors could create an assembly line of lies because their goal was not divine truth, but procedural compliance. A confession was not the outcome of an investigation, but a necessary item on a checklist to close the case. How could one torture a person by day and then calmly dine with one's family in the evening, considering oneself a good Christian? Through the mechanism of diffused responsibility. The Inquisitor only asked questions. The executioner only applied the instruments. The scribe only recorded the testimony. No single person was solely responsible for the death. The guilt dissolved into the system. Responsibility was structured like a body. The scribe was the hand, the executioner the muscle, and the Inquisitor the nerve impulse. No single part perceived itself as a murderer. And now the answer to the first question is clear. Logical arguments were dangerous for the accused because they broke the protocol. They forced the Inquisitor, the bureaucrat, to think instead of following instructions. Silence or a quick confession fit perfectly into his workflow. Why was the most influential tool of the witch hunts, the book Malleus Maleficarum, officially condemned by the theological faculty of the University of Cologne almost immediately after its publication? How did a rejected text become law? Heinrich Kramer's book was the first to systematize all the methods into a single guide. It was the perfect manual for a pragmatist. But in 1490, Europe's leading theologians called it unethical and illegal. Kramer himself was expelled from Cologne for his views. It seemed to be the end, but the opposite happened. The bureaucratic machine needed a convenient rulebook, and it chose one, ignoring the opinion of experts. The system proved more important than the truth it supposedly defended. The machine began to live a life of its own. 7 steps, 7 tools. Now they are assembled. The presumption of guilt creates the target. Isolation and physiological exhaustion prepare the victim. Trap questions and the illusion of mercy break her will. Social contagion supplies new victims. And bureaucratization greases the gears, making the process endless. This machine was built 500 years ago, but its blueprints are not obsolete. In the final part, we will assemble this Inquisitor's Handbook in its entirety point by point, and we will see which of its lessons we are obligated to learn so that we do not become its next victims. So, let's assemble the complete Inquisitor's Handbook. Step 1. Establish a presumption of guilt. Interpret any argument for innocence as a trick of the devil. Your goal is not to investigate, but to confirm a verdict that has already been rendered. Step 2. Isolate the subject. Cut them off from family, from sunlight, from the cycle of day and night. Every creak of the door, every piece of bread brought to them, must come only from you. You become their only connection to reality, their sole authority. Step 3. Use linguistic traps. Your task is not to get information, but to destroy the very ability to think logically. Ask questions where any answer leads to a dead end. Make them doubt their own memories and words. These 3 steps create the perfect foundation. The subject is demoralized, isolated, and no longer trusts themselves. Now, the engine of the machine can be placed on this foundation. Once the foundation is ready, the engine that produces confessions is started. Step 4. Exhaust them physiologically. A body deprived of sleep ceases to obey the mind. Critical thinking is the first thing to go. A mind clouded by hunger and fatigue becomes pliable and ready for suggestion. Step 5. Offer the illusion of hope. When the subject is on the brink, offer them not life, but an end to the pain. This is the key substitution. They must believe that confessing is an act of mercy on your part, the only way out of their hell. Step 6. Trigger a chain reaction. Each new name obtained under torture is not just a new accused person. It is proof of the system's effectiveness and fuel for its continued operation. This is how you turn a broken victim into an unwitting recruiter. This engine not only breaks the will, but also provides its own resources. But for this engine to run forever without fail, it needs lubricant. And finally, step 7, the most important one, the lubricant that allows the machine to run forever. Bureaucratize the process. Turn torture into a line item in a protocol and execution into an accounting entry. Evil becomes invisible when it is documented on paper. The perpetrator is no longer a torturer, but a clerk following instructions. His conscience is clear because he doesn't make decisions, he only follows procedure. These 7 steps are a timeless manual for hacking the human will. This is not just history, it is a warning. Because this machine does not rust, it only changes its scenery. Today, it might not be religious dogma, but corporate regulations or political ideology, but its mechanisms work just as flawlessly. This psychological terror lasted for over 300 years, 10 times longer than the United States of America has existed. And the main question that remains after all this. Now that we see the entire system, the main question is for you. What, in your opinion, was the main driver of this machine of terror? The sincere, fanatical faith of the Inquisitors in their divine mission, or a cynical, cold calculation and a thirst for limitless power? Write just one word in the comments. Faith or power? No explanations, just your choice. I'm very interested to see which one comes out on top. Thank you for watching.